So if we use absolute identity, we can count 3 Allahs. Now, why do I say this? Well, a lot of people are still going around using the objection, saying something along the lines of, if you use absolute identity, the Trinity falls into polytheism or a contradiction. Now, just off the fact that we're just going to say straight off that that's false. There are formalizations that you can use the absolute identity operator and model the Trinity perfectly fine. So it's just false off face value. But let me explain what I mean, why I say that we can count 3 Allahs using absolute identity. I make this very sort of analogy in my paper, the LPT paper. I will link it below so that you guys can read that, grab that to understand exactly what I'm saying in more technical detail. But let's get right into it. What do I mean we can count 3 Allahs using absolute identity? Well, the objection that people bring up with absolute identity is they'll say, again, something like, well, if you use absolute identity, the Trinity will fall into polytheism and or a contradiction. And really what they're saying is, if you use this particular formalization, right? Because absolute identity is just describing the logical structure of identity. It is not a particular formalization. And what is that formalization that they're talking about? Well, they're talking about Richard Cartwright's, or what's first attributed to Richard Cartwright, which is the Father is God, the Son is God, the Holy Spirit is God, and those are all absolute identity statements. And then the non-identity is also absolute identity, and then you have there is one God, how we would standardly write it, absolute identity. So they're really saying this particular formalization yields polytheism or a contradiction. Okay, I mean, we don't have any disagreement there. You can construct all types of formalizations that may or may not include contradictions for Tawheed, for example. So is that a gotcha? No. Well, actually, you can formalize the statements Allah is merciful, Allah is loving, Allah is creator as identity statements, absolute identity statements. And then when you say creator is not loving, loving is not whatnot, and you say those don't collapse into each other, you end up with 3 Allahs. And this is my point. You can construct a formalization that yields polytheism, that yields a contradiction. Now, what the Muslim is going to say is, well, that's not what we mean when we say Allah is merciful. We don't mean Allah is identical to mercy or being merciful. That's the point. That's the point that I am making in my paper. And that's the point I'm making here, is that what matters is not simply you have some formalization. What matters is whether the informal statements, truth conditions are preserved into whatever model you're trying to construct here. What does that mean exactly? Well, that means that if you construct a model or a formalization where Allah is an identity statement, and that means, like absolute identity, all properties transfer over one to the other, that's not what Muslims mean. Likewise, Christians, any Christian who understands what absolute identity is and understands how Leibniz's law functions will know that, and they're aware of their Orthodox Trinitarian commitments, they'll know that if someone asks them, is the essence absolutely identical with the Son? They're going to say no, because there are things of the essence that are not of the person, right? We have hypostatic properties and we have properties as they're essential to the essence. So anyone who's aware of that and is aware of orthodoxy is going to understand that expressing it in that way is not what we mean. So we don't express it that way. And that's exactly the same for the person who believes in Tawheed. And a Christian comes up to them and they say, well, I can formalize it as Allah is merciful, Allah is loving, Allah is creator, but those aren't each other. And I can derive 3 Allahs. It's true, but the Muslim is going to say that's not what we mean. So we will not formalize it that way, because to formalize it that way would be to tarnish the original truth conditions of those informal statements into the model. It's going to be a model, but it's not going to be a model of Tawheed. Likewise, you can construct a model where you derive three gods, but it's just not going to be a model of the Trinity. It's not going to be a model of the Trinity. It's going to be a model of some, random whatever theory. It's just not going to be the Trinity. So that's what I want to say. This objection, it's really self-refuting. In my paper, I provide an argument against this directly, where it shows that if the Muslim wants to run this argument, they're inevitably shooting themselves in the foot, because they're going to have to say their own doctrines are illogical, because you can construct formalizations which derive contradictions, and polytheism using absolute identity. But people don't really understand that, because most people don't really understand the difference between an informal set of statements, a theory, and a model. So they think that just because the Muslim has constructed some specific formalization which drives contradiction, that means that the Trinity is in trouble of some kind.